Welcome into Scoop and Score. My name's Tanner, and we're finally at that point in the season that we're starting to get enough data on these teams to get some separation so I can finally release a full top 25 power rating. Power ratings are a little weird because the top 10 or so teams separate themselves pretty quickly, but for the majority of the season, or up until this point, from somewhere around 10 to 15 through 25, there was literally maybe 3 to 4 point separation. But now we're finally getting to the point that there's enough separation between all these teams that I can actually do 1 through 25 fairly reliably. And anyway, we'll just go ahead and jump into it. I'll give a little bit on each team and why they are where they are. Disclaimer, this is a power rating and not a ranking like an AP poll. So it's just who would win on a neutral field. So this is very important, actually. Not a ranking on wins and losses. It's who would win on a neutral field according to my computer model. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Again, I'm just going to give a couple quick notes until I get to the top 10 or so on why these teams are where they are. If I give a full breakdown on each team, it'll still be a 2-hour video. So again, just a couple quick notes on each team until I get to around the top 10, and then I'll give a little bit more detail. So anyway, here we go. 25, I got North Carolina. Solid offense, terrible defense. Kansas State, I got at 24. Good offense, good defense, but a pretty bad offensive efficiency. They put up a lot of yardage and not a lot of points. Kentucky at 23. Solid defense, mediocre offense. That's about all there is on that. Tulane at 22 was kind of surprising. They play really good offense and pretty solid defense. Syracuse at 21. Pretty mediocre offense, but a pretty good defense. At 20, this is another shocker for most people. The AP refuses to rank them, but at 20, power rating, I have Liberty. Liberty is a really good offense, 436 yards a game, and a pretty good defense. The defense doesn't hold them back. 19 is Ole Miss. One of the best rush offenses in the country. Decent offense overall, but a pretty bad defense, statistically at least. At 18, I have Washington. Same story, really good offense, pretty mediocre defense, actually a pretty bad defense that holds them back. 17, I have LSU. LSU's a good offense, good defense, not great in either. 16, Penn State, kind of the same story as LSU. Good offense, good defense, not great at either. 15 through 11. So at 15, I have Oklahoma State. They're a really good offense and a really bad defense. Their defense, they would be top 10 if their defense wasn't, or if their defense holds them back. 14, I have Cincinnati. Cincinnati's a really good defense, a pretty solid offense. Cincinnati's had a lot of close games, which is kind of interesting to me. I think they're head and shoulders should be the best team in the American, besides maybe Tulane. But they're playing teams close, so I want to see them open their margin of victory a little bit. 13, I have Utah. Utah's kind of the same story as a lot of these teams. It's I would say good offense and a mediocre defense. Defense doesn't really hold them back. Their offense is better than their defense. 12, I have USC. Great offense, mediocre defense holds them back a little bit. Texas at 11. Texas is 3-loss team. Their offense is one of the best in the country statistically. Their defense is a lot better than a lot better than the perception of what Texas defense is. Texas is Texas. I'm not a Texas fan, but I kind of pull for Texas because it's just one of those programs. I don't want to say college football is better when they're better, but I don't know. College football is more competitive when Texas is better. We'll put it that way. And they just have this thing of just, for the past 2 seasons under Sark, I want to believe in Sark too, because he recruits well, he's a good offensive mind, and they have flashes of good play under Sark, and then they just blow second half leads. But that's my sob story on Texas. We'll get into the top 10 here. At 10, I have Wake Forest, which is actually probably pretty surprising to some people. Wake Forest is the most efficient offense in the country. Total offense, they're one of the best offenses in the country. Their defense is bad, 102% of opponent total yardage, but their defense isn't terrible. It's not even the worst in the top 25. TCU at 9. TCU is one of the most explosive offenses in the country. Probably one of the best total offenses in the country. 504 yards per game, 11.9 yards per point. They're same story as Wake Forest. Their defense is bad, but it's not as bad as people think. 101% of opponent total yardage. They're actually really good against the run. I wouldn't say really good. They are good against the run. 88% of opponent rush averages. They're bad against the pass. 113% of opponent pass averages. UCLA fell to 8 in my power ratings. They're still an elite offense, 500 yards a game. They're an efficient offense. Their defense isn't as good as I thought. They're down to 92%, or I guess up to 92% of opponent total averages. I think last week they're in the 80s, which would put them as one of the better defenses in the country, actually. They're a decent defense. They're not a terrible defense. Oregon's offense in this game, or in that game last week, is just better than I thought it was. And that leads us into number 7, which is Oregon. Oregon actually has a pretty elite offense. I didn't think they were near as good offensively as they showed in the UCLA game. Or UCLA is a pretty good defense. So I wanted them to play against a better defense like UCLA's defense and see what they could do. And yeah, they're elite offensively. Bo Nix looks like a totally different Bo Nix than the Bo Nix that played at Auburn, and even the Bo Nix that played against Georgia in week 1. I'm curious to see a rematch of that game. I don't think it'll happen. I don't see how it would happen even in the bowl games, but I would be curious to see a rematch of the Georgia-Oregon game. I don't think Georgia's 49-3 better than Oregon. And even when you look at the box score in that game, Oregon moved the ball decently well against Georgia. They just had turnovers and they had a bunch of empty yardage. I forget what the exact yardage for Oregon was in that game. I could look it up, but they had over 300 yards in that game, I want to say, and 3 points. So even against Georgia, Oregon moved the ball. They just couldn't score. So Oregon, I think, is pretty elite offensively. Like I said, I don't think they could beat Georgia. I still think that's probably a 2-touchdown game, but not a 40-point game. We'll move on to number 6, which is going to be Clemson. Clemson's a lot better this year offensively than they were last year, but their offense kind of holds them back a little bit. They have a pretty elite defense. They're allowing 89% of opponent total averages, which doesn't sound elite, but when we get into some of the top 5 statistics, you'll see that 89% is pretty good. They're absolutely elite against the rush, 63% of opponent rush averages and 99% of opponent pass averages. The 99% of opponent pass averages, I think, is more because teams can't run the ball against them, so they're stuck resorting to the pass. I think they're better against the pass, and that number alludes. Clemson's defense is pretty elite. And that brings us into the top 5, which things get a little bit interesting, and we'll get into where the gaps are between teams here and after we get through the top 5. But yeah, things get a little bit interesting here. At number 5 got Tennessee. Probably, I think they are the number 1 total offense in the country. 551 yards per game. They're an efficient offense, 11.9 yards per point. Their defense is bad, but not horrible. 104% of opponent totals. Number 4, I got Michigan. Their offense is better than people think it is. I would call Michigan's offense elite. 474 yards per game, and an efficient offense at 11.7 yards per point. And 76% of opponent total yardage. Their defense is one of the best defenses in the country. At number 3, I got Alabama. I know they lost to Tennessee, but again, this is a power rating. We'll talk about this in a second. Alabama would be favored against Tennessee on the neutral field. That's simply how it is. I know they lost to Tennessee at Tennessee on the game on the field, but Alabama would be favored against Tennessee on a neutral field tomorrow. Vegas would say the same thing. I would be shocked if they didn't. Anyway, Alabama, 485 yards per game, 12.2 yards per point, an efficient offense. An elite defense, 72% of opponent total yardage is allowed. Georgia at number 2, 535 yards per game. An efficient offense as well, 12.9 yards per point. They have the best defense of the country, only allowing 69% of opponent total yardage, 56% of opponent rush yardage. And then they're good against the pass too, only 79%, which is one of the best numbers in the country. In general, pass numbers are a lot higher percentage-wise than rush numbers because it's a lot harder to stop the pass. Elite pass, or not even elite, good good passing attacks will pass the ball on even a good defense, where even a good rush, good to even the best rushing attack in the country, when it plays the best defense in the country, will get shut down. But anyway, let's go ahead and talk about where some of these margins, or where the big breaks or gaps are between teams and my poll. So the gap between Ohio State and Georgia is at 2.5 points. The gap between Ohio State and Alabama at 3 is 5 points. The gap between Ohio State and Michigan at 4, according to my model, is 6.5 points. And then here's a big break. Ohio State is a 14-point favorite at over Tennessee. Michigan is a 6.5-point favorite over Tennessee. So there's a big break between 4 and 5 in my model. There's another tier of teams between 5 and 10. So Tennessee would only be a 5-point favorite over Wake Forest. There's a 5-point gap between 5 and 10. There's a 6-point gap between 10 and 16. So Wake Forest would be a 6-point favorite over Penn State. That's another tier of teams between 10 and 15. And then there's 10 teams within 4 points between 16 and 25. Penn State would only be a 4-point favorite over North Carolina. So between 16 and 25, there's only a 4-point break, which I just think is kind of interesting. There's a smaller gap between 16 and 25 than there is between 1 and 4. According to my model. And I know that the JP poll, the Josh Pates poll, late kick poll, power ratings that they do, I know I know for most of the season, I haven't followed it as close for the past couple weeks because, I've been starting my own channel and it's a lot of work. But I know for most of the starting of the season, there was like 1 or 2 points between 10 and 25. So I think it's kind of interesting that my model kind of mirrors them. Not exactly, it doesn't mirror them, but it has kind of the same trends as far as breaks between teams and different tiers between teams. So anyway, thanks for watching. I'd greatly appreciate it if you liked and subbed to the channel. I'm just starting the channel off, and it's, like I said, it's a lot of work to do these videos, so I'd greatly appreciate it. It helps me out a lot. Again, thanks for watching. Peace.